for you, and it's for Monday, the 19th day of January. Here we go. You know that whenever you buy brand new dishes, those dishes need to be toveled. That means dipped in a mikveh before you're allowed to use them. So today we have this unusual scenario, and this can happen. You bought a couple of new dishes, and it's Shabbos, and you realize in the middle of Shabbos that, uh-oh, I never toveled these dishes. Can I just quickly take them over to the mikveh now on Shabbos because I'm not supposed to use them until I dip them in the mikveh? Well, most of the poskim believe that dipping a dish in a mikveh in that way, where it was unusable before the dip in the mikveh and then usable after the dip in the mikveh, kind of gives the appearance, it's not real, but it gives the appearance that you're quote-unquote fixing that vessel, because it was unusable before you dipped it in the mikveh and then totally usable after you dipped it in the mikveh. And therefore, a lot of poskim disallow dipping dishes in the mikveh to tovel them, to make them usable on Shabbos. But let's say you really, really need to use that vessel. Are there any loopholes? Are there any legalities? Are there any ways to get it done? And there are. Number one, the rabbi said that you could use a discrete tevilah. I'll explain that in just a moment, but a tevilah that's not so obviously a dunk in the mikveh, that would be allowed because, after all, this is not really fixing a vessel at all. It just looks like it's fixing a vessel. If it's done in a very discrete dip in the mikveh, then it wouldn't give that appearance and the rabbis would allow it. What would be considered a discrete way to dip a thing in the mikveh? It would be this. It would be with something like a cup or a bowl. You would dip the bowl in the mikveh, and the reason it wouldn't look like a tevilah would be because you would then lift out the bowl with the mikveh water in it, carry that mikveh water over to somewhere that you need to make something wet, and use that water. So although you just dunked it in the mikveh, it doesn't fully look like a dunk in the mikveh because it was really going into the mikveh to get you some water to spill onto something. No joking around. So if you did it this way, it would be considered a discrete tevilah, a discrete dip in the mikveh, and that would make it allowed. But there are problems with this mechanism. Problem number one is you'd have to be certain that there was an eruv that allowed the carrying from where the mikveh was to where your house was. You'd also have to make certain that the bowl got completely in and that you loosened your grip on the bowl such that when it went into the mikveh, it was all at once in the mikveh. So if you're doing that method, all those things would have to come true. And please realize that, of course, this method won't work for something like a fork or a knife, because a fork or a knife cannot carry water discreetly from the mikveh over to somewhere else, because only a cup or a bowl does something like that. So in times of need, there is a different way to fix this problem, and that is to give the knife or fork or anything like that to a non-Jew and tell him that it's his for Shabbos, and now that it's his, it doesn't need any tevilah because only something that you buy, you the Jew, needs a tevilah when it's brand new, and it's not owned by a Jew right now. And so in times of need, although we don't like to give gifts on Shabbos, but in times of need you could do this, give it to the guy, then say, may I please borrow it, and then you borrow that fork from him for the rest of Shabbos, and it doesn't need any tevilah because it's not owned by a Jew right now. It's owned by a non-Jew, and he just lent it to you. This will, of course, help for things like forks and knives. Of course, you won't need any mikveh fix. You won't need any eruv, and that would be a good solution if you really needed to do it that way. You should just know that if both of these solutions are not available, a mikveh is not nearby, and a non-Jew is not available to do this, if you're desperate, no, I didn't say that exactly right, because I mean if no Jew is available, but a mikveh is still somehow available, then what you could do is dip something even like a knife in the mikveh if you're desperate. If you can't cut any of your Shabbos food and that's the only knife you would have, I guess that's not a typical situation. But if that were to happen, that it was an incredibly important knife and you had to have it for the rest of Shabbos to cut the meat, otherwise nobody was eating the rest of Shabbos, then in that situation you would just be allowed to just dunk it in a mikveh and rely on the few poskim who say that it's okay to dunk a vessel in a mikveh. We don't like to rely on those poskim unless we really have to. And if you really had to, like it was your only knife for the whole Shabbos, I wouldn't imagine that would happen, but if it would, then you would be allowed to rely on the few poskim. Some of them are very important, so you would be allowed to rely on them, and you would be allowed to dip that knife in the mikveh. Hope that wasn't too complicated, but do try to take care of all of your tevilah dishes needs before Shabbos. Thanks for logging on. Log on again tomorrow for more. Bye-bye.